Welcome to Mind Meets Body and Soul, a podcast that connects the dots between clinical mental health and spiritual holistic wellness. I'm Heather, a licensed clinical social worker and mental health guru.
And I'm Devon, a Reiki master, spiritual teacher, and lover of all things woo-woo. We're here to discuss various wellness topics, highlighting the connection between the mind, body, and soul.
We'll be offering nuggets of wisdom from each of our fields with the ultimate goal of bridging the gap between our two worlds. Whether you lean more into cognitive psychology
or flow with the woo-woo waters, our intention is to help you prioritize yourself and unlock a fresh perspective to healing, growth, and expansion. We're so excited you're here. Let's jump in. Hello. Welcome back to Mind Meets Body and Soul, episode 34. This is Devon here with my lovely co-host, Heather. How's it going?
It's going well, Devon. Thank you. How are you?
I'm doing well. We are at nearing the end of the month at the time that we are recording this podcast. We have 1 day left in Scorpio season, heading into my favorite season of the year, Sagittarius season. And we have a perfectly aligned guest for this end of Scorpio season, heading into Sagittarius, end of the month. We have joining us today a friend of mine. Her name is Rae. Rae is an intuitive, energetic alchemist with a focus on spiritual and business soul activation, as well as animal communication and energy attunement. She uses her intuitive gifts, astrological insight, and energy healing in a unique way that reads, tracks, and transforms energy in the body, mind, and business. This combination creates soul-aligned healing for all beings and for your soul-aligned business. She is here to guide, mentor, inspire, and help both you and your animals on your soul's journey of emotional, physical, and spiritual evolution. So she is a very special guest and friend of mine. I'm happy to have her on the podcast. Rae, welcome to Mind Meets Body and Soul.
Thanks for having me. I feel very excited about this one.
Me too. We've had a number of guests on here from all different walks of life, those who lean more into Heather's field of the clinical, the psychology, and then also in more of my field and world of the spiritual and energetics. And so I'm really excited to have you on because the first part of what you do that I was drawn to was your work in animal communication. And so I know that our guests are like, what is that about? What does that mean? Teach me more about the ways that I can communicate with my animal, with my pet. So if you wouldn't mind just starting us off there, how you got started in this field of animal communication and transitioning end of life. That'd be great.
It's a long story, but I'll try to simplify it as best as I can. I've been really deeply involved with animals. It's a very integrated past life gift that I've come into this world with that was extremely natural to me even from a young child. So it was one of those things that as a kid, it wasn't just drawn to animals. I took care of the animals. I was the child that would come home from school in fourth grade and walk her dog, 2 miles, and I've just always been really connected with animals and understood them at a really deep level. Although I thought for most of my life that this was, well, I knew not everybody loved animals. I just assumed oh, well, everybody connects this way or whatever. This isn't abnormal or this isn't really unique. And as I, matured through life and went through different phases of career and different layers of that, it was pre-vet in college. Then it was a vet tech for 11 years. And I owned a dog grooming salon, which I actually just only recently sold 2 years ago, that I bought when I was 26. And I had training businesses off of that where I worked with really reactive dogs and trained dogs to high levels of competition, train my own dogs, and everything happened really quickly when it came to me and animals. I also trained horses off the track, so you're talking a lot of wild energy and then bringing it in. And I was just it's not that big of a deal. But when it really occurred to me is when I had my own animals, my own dogs, that herding is really, really intricate and you're communicating with multiple species. You have the dogs, you have your livestock. And so there's a lot of energies there. And I started realizing like there was a lot more there, and I quickly excelled in it, and before I know it, within just a couple of years with multiple dogs, I was like competing at national levels and like winning. And I'm like, I shouldn't even be doing this. I'm not even known for this. And that's where it really hit the mark for me, is that there was something different that I did. And I did it with many, many different animals through life, and was able to really rehabilitate a lot of animals, and working with rescues and working with all kinds of energies like that. And I somehow won trust of animals very, very quickly. And it was because they knew I understood them and saw them differently, and I understood their instincts. So that's about as quickly as I can summarize it, but there's so much more there. And how it went and sort of merged into the end of life is that, as an animal communicator, I mean, one of the things that people come to you quite regularly with are, unresolved health conditions and behavioral ailments, I'll call them, And so one of my gifts, Devon, as you know, is like yourself, being a gifted energy healer, And so I combined the animal communication with the energy healing and started working with the people and the animals, calling it like, it was basically animal connection coaching, animal communication and connection coaching. And so I really worked with the people and their energetic patterns of how this was also, mirroring back to our animals. Our animals are mirroring back to us all kinds of energetic, patterns all the time. And likewise, we are to them. So it's not, we are totally responsible for them. It's, they've also come in here with their own lessons and karma and things to work through as well. And so we're all like this really synergetic, like chemistry working together to clear and heal together. So the end of life felt like an opportunity to really bring this full throttle. And so, versus where I've had end of life sessions for my own animals, and it was very much just like, is this time? Is this it? But what I actually do uniquely is like, I can tell you when your animal's ready. I can't tell you when you're ready. I can tell when you're ready, but like if your animal's not ready, it's this whole, animals and humans come to this decision together. It's not one or the other, And so I found that as I started understanding that from that energetic perspective, it created so much healing and gifts and opportunity, and a really, really challenging, like the most misunderstood, in my opinion, part of our lives with our animals. And there's so much information, Heather, as you probably know, when it comes to humans around navigating grief and death and transition, but not enough with animals, on the emotional. Like, they are energy sweepers. They're in our homes. They're like, moving energy all the time. And so when they leave, it can often feel like even a bigger void to some people, And so that's where that came from. And it's just helping people relieve guilt and doubt and come to that decision, and like walk them through energetically, feeling that with their animals and feeling that connection with their animals, so that they can make that decision holistically, and not feel, that guilt that so many people often do with that.
I'm like tearing up the whole time that you're talking, because I'm like we've had dogs my whole life and I am obsessed with all of them, probably like too obsessed. And it's just like very emotional. And I think you being able to speak to that and work in that way with both a person and their animal, I think is so helpful and so important. I mean, like, pet loss is becoming something that like people are talking a lot more in mental health, and I'm seeing like even like pet loss groups. So like I love that you're here to be able to speak to and facilitate some of that energy and that emotion, because that is, a really impactful time in a person and in their animal's life.
It is. It really is. And it's just being able to combine like the everyday emotions around that. And then, also with the spiritual aspects of connecting thereafter, and the void that we go through in that loss, and the emotions. And I recently lost my dog Rhythm back in August, and she was 15 and a half. And I've lost many. I mean, I've had many animals my whole life. I've never not had a pack of dogs. I've had cats, horses, you name it. Um, and so it was really interesting with that experience, because she was the first animal I'd lost since 2012. And the first one that I lost in this as I was this deep in this journey of being an animal communicator. And I have held hundreds and hundreds of sessions for end of life over the last 8 years. And it constantly evolves and grows as like the animals are teaching me so much around that journey, you know? And so I basically, with Rhythm, it was so clear with Rhythm. She was like, you need to sit with this. You need to be with every emotion of this. And I'm I have like an Aquarius, like Cazimi in my chart. So emotions and a Capricorn moon are very hard for me to sit with. I can bypass extremely easily, you know? And so that was a really big challenge for me. And the reason why is because she was so clear, like, this will help many people. And it was like, okay. And she's like, and not only that, just the animals as well. So I did. And it really became relevant to me. She was 15 and a half. So she had many different exit points. You know, this wasn't a sudden loss. This was a gradual thing from January of 2023 till her loss of August. And it was an entire chapter, you know, of this whole experience. And there were several points where she could have, she easily, I was like, is this it? And then there was that fight, that resiliency that came back. And, you know, it just wasn't time. There was still things we were here to move through together. And, you know, and so I really like sat with that and basically deconstructed the entire process and made notes. And I didn't know why I was even going to be doing this. And then thereafter, I guess it was like last month, I did a 2-part series, which ended up being more of a 3-part. It's over 3 hours worth of like sharing in a group setting around that journey of the pre-grief and the emotions we go through and the doubt and what we can do to actually create more ritual around that exit, you know, their official exit, and how coming to terms, like how we discover that, how we understand that, how we learn that and connecting through it. And then, you know, the actual, you know, journey to the transition and moving through that. And then I just kind of labeled them through all these points. And it was like, wow, okay, this is a whole different perspective than I have ever had, and also brought such awareness to me that I had devalued the importance of that gift of my own. While I knew I was helping other people, and I always prioritize those. If they come in, they're like right there. But I didn't realize how important it really was to other people until I went through it myself. And then I reached out to somebody that I had mentored under me years ago to even help me. It's like, because I was still in my humanity and my human experience of like, I know this is it, but I've also am feeling this and that. And, you know, so it really is something that I feel will come on kind of like an end of life doula, you know, is like, and I don't it's also something that to be in that experience, you have to be able to hold a lot of energetic space for one's suffering, you know, and you can't project. You cannot like put your story or your like, I've been where the animal is so ready, but the human isn't, you know, and for months. And so this animal feels its suffering, but the animals are always like, I'm ready when my human is ready, you know? And likewise. So it's just, you know, and people are suffering and it's so much emotion and everybody has to come to this in their own time. And what we don't realize is it's always done together. It's not like if that animal's ready and I feel it, it doesn't mean that they're like, oh, resenting their human because their human's not ready. They're like, we will, we will ride this out until he or she is ready. Like it's meant to be together, you know? So
That's so beautiful. Thank you, Ray. Oh, Heather.
I was not ready for this conversation today. My goodness. Just don't mind me weeping.
Just for context, Ray, Heather's got very strong Cancer and Pisces placements.
oh, I love my
Waterworks over here.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It-
Oh, Heather. That was so beautifully said, Ray. Thank you so much. I'm happy that Rhythm has made an appearance in this podcast just by mentioning her, talking about your journey with her. And I know just through following your journey on social media, how beautiful it was that you were able to show us the process of transitioning. And especially like you as a professional doing it is one thing, but you then going through that on the personal level, totally different, depth and so much emotion and grieving that comes with that. What's interesting is that on this podcast, Heather and I always talk about how much we can gain or how much we can learn through our relationships. We have talked extensively about our relationships with friends, romantic partners, family members, coworkers, relationship to self. We've even talked about our relationship to nature and the world around us. And we have never once really touched on the relationship with animals and the relationship with our pets
Yeah.
specifically. So it's really special that we can have you here on this episode to speak exactly to that.
Yeah, that's interesting that you pick that up, because I feel like we heal through them. And I mean, it truly is like if we're willing to see energy through a different lens and a different mirror, we can really work through the same things that we can work through in our regular relationships. I think our animals are just a little bit more forgiving, and because they can't obviously speak in the context that, like, if we're in a partnership and we do something that, bothers somebody, they can speak to that, or we can sort that out in our mind. Our animals are very instinctual. And that's one thing that our human brain doesn't really recognize often. And one of the things I'm constantly reinforcing to people is like, animals are in the moment. They're always on their instincts, and their instincts, depending on just like us as humans, their conditioning, their environment, their genetics, and taking this a step further, also like their karma. What did they come here to work through? And some have chosen a really hard path, and others are choosing a really luminous path. Like Rhythm had she was here just to be super happy, but I also needed that because I had been through a lot of karma with animals, and and so it was like almost like, here is the goodness, and here's the richness. And so it really, but I still learned so much with her around opening my heart. And the really interesting thing with animals is like when we bring them into our world, like when we connect, however you do with that animal, and this is the animal, it's coming into my world, no matter what age it is, no matter what, they always come in reflecting to you where you're at in your emotional landscape at the time. And sometimes it can be a spiritual landscape, but I find it's much more like more the emotional landscape, or what you're healing through, what you need to heal through. And sometimes it's not always what you want, it's like what you need to heal through. And so as we heal from them, we can start to, a really good example of this is like, okay, with Rhythm, I had just lost, when she came into my world, she was 2008. Then by 2012, I lost 3 dogs and my mother. And one of those dogs that I lost in that year had a really bad congenital like heart defect called Tetralogy. And I rescued him. And it didn't dawn on me till he passed. He lived way past his life expectancy. And, he was a little rigid and a little hard to get through into his heart. And then once you did, man, he just loved you. And it really occurred to me after he passed, it was like, oh my gosh, he taught me to open up my heart. Like and he lived so much longer, than what he ever was supposed to. And then there was this like heart opening of like, he was a genetic mess. He had one eye, a crooked tail. He was hard to kind of get through that heart. But then, like I said, once you did, he like landed. And so I had worked through a lot of that, and I was really able to connect. But I also, another animal that I lost at that time, had really, really severe behavioral stuff that it was just a genetic miscross, and he really led me on my path to animal communication. And I had to let him go way earlier than what I ever would. I mean, it was just because it was becoming such a danger, and he was not rehomable, because it wasn't just with animals, it was with people. And how do you rehome, you know? And then certainly if he would have been in my life and been an only dog, he probably would have been fine, for the most part, other than you couldn't take him out, and stuff like that. But again, that like traumatized my heart. And I had to go through so much guilt. It took me years to work through that. And so rhythm coming in was almost like the elevated experience of all of those hardships. When Willie, the one with the heart condition, was in my world, there was so much hardship in my life, that I was releasing from my childhood and traumas and all this stuff, and learning how to open up to these experiences. And then rhythm comes in, and then step further, Cora comes in, and they just elevate this experience, and elevate even my animal communication gifts. And the cat, that always happens when I'm in it's like, oh, you're talking about communication, here we are. So that's just kind of like one way that it all sort of works. And then I had a dog catcher come in the same year that I had all that loss. He's still with me. And catcher came in with a lot of insecurity, a lot of overprotectiveness, but I wasn't protecting my own boundaries energetically. And he still will show me when I'm not. But as I've learned to work through that, his behavior is much easier. In fact, it doesn't even bother me. And so then you can see, as it doesn't bother me, then it's like not even an issue for him. And that's how it sort of works. It's like, and I always say to people, the things that really annoy you the most in your animals are also the reflection of what's going on in you, that they're just here to like share with you, and the wisdom that they're trying to teach you.
So, did I give my dog my anxiety, or is she like she's mirroring me, is what I'm hearing?
Well, that's a loaded question, because one, I
I'm
have to tune in a little bit. I can, if you want me to. What is
I'm
your
I'm mostly teasing. I didn't mean to make this
well?
like about me
No,
in that
it's
way.
good. It's good. It's actually really good. I don't mind at all. So yes and no, I'll say this. And I hear this all the time with anxiety, actually. It's one of the common things. I feel like with anxiety, we can definitely exacerbate that in our animals. So that maybe she, he,
She.
yeah. So maybe she came in with a little bit of like hard wiring, like predisposition, or whatever her experience was before you, that kind of conditioned her to be that way. And sometimes we as humans don't realize like those behaviors that the animals have, what they actually need is the opposite of what we would naturally give. So with a child, we would naturally give a lot of like loving support, and probably hold them, and it's like love them through that, and give them structure through that in the way of guidance, and words and wisdom, or whatever that they needed. With animals, the one thing, so what happens is a lot of humans go and they do the same to the animals. What that does to us as an animal is it actually reinforces that behavior, and it has the opposite effect. So then we can energetically create sort of this like looping, and then they start to think, oh, I'm supposed to be this way because I'm getting this approval or this praise for this, so therefore there must be something right in this. And so it can easily exacerbate that. And so what they actually need is the opposite. They need structure. They need very clear, like, it's black or white. There's no in between for animals. They need to like have very clear, concise, like, energy of us saying, I've got you. I'm here to lead you. Our animals, even cats, they don't do what they do well in groups. They have a hierarchy. They will select that hierarchy. And so if we're not giving them that leadership that like they're looking to us to have, then it creates a disconnection, and then they feel more anxious because they're now leading themselves. And most animals are not natural born leaders. Like they're not. They would easily, like, I've been in packs of dogs and horses and herds, and have multiple cats, and they will always like default to the one that they feel is actually the best, even if they might resent it at first. Eventually they give in to it. So hopefully that makes sense. And then the flip side of that too is, if we are naturally anxious, and we're always in that anxious, and we get an animal that can't hold that energy, because that's a lot, it will create more anxiety and flip that back to them.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. I mean, everything that you're saying I think is really interesting. And if I may, Devin will probably laugh at this question. I'm like a little bit of a researchy data person. So like what my question for you is, what does this like look like if you're in a session or you're working with an animal and their human, their owner, like what is the, like in therapy, I'm talking to people, right? We're talking about
Mhm.
processing and working through things. Like, what does your work look like?
It's very different. So it's a little multifaceted too. Um, if it was somebody coming to me, new person, new client, and end of life sessions very different, right? That's specifically geared around this. We're moving energy, we're prepping the body for release, for a peaceful exit, because so much of what I do is energetic, and I completely respect and value that need for data and like, how does this look? How can we create this? It actually kept me from doing what I do for like years. I mean, decades, because I was looking so much for the logic in that. And because I couldn't tangibly find it, I had to just believe that this was something that was not something I could actually just tap into and say, here's the step by step for this, because it just doesn't work that way. When you're somebody that reads and tracks energy, that's what you're doing all the time. You're reading and tracking energy in everything you do. So like my body is like, it's came here to do that and do it in many different ways. And so, but I'm also really grounded. I have a Capricorn moon. So everything that comes through has to somehow create some sort of tangible result. It can't just be like, here's a bunch of woo BS and then like go out and do it. It's like, I'm going to give you real stuff and you're probably going to see results pretty darn quick, and have that. And then topping it off with energy. So in a, in a regular session, say somebody came to me, we'll use behavioral because we're on the behavioral aspect of it. Even though my primary focus at this point has really gone towards more like health, medical intuition and energy, using energy clearing to help with like senior animals and things like that. But we'll stick on the premise of that because they do work with some show dogs too that, so they're in very stressful environments. But it would basically, somebody comes to me and they have issues or problems or whatnot, and I go into a whole, like, prior to, I might connect for 10 or so minutes, just pulling in the animal's energy without the human, getting a vibe. What are they thinking and feeling? And for me, it's a, what's the word? All sensing. So I have a unique ability to like really tune into somebody's emotional world. And so if you, and I don't do this outside of session at all. I never do actually, which is why it's really hard for me to explain what I do. But in session, and I basically open up and I become like a channel for that of receiving information. I actually don't hear it like, oh, it's not a dialogue. It's not a conversation. Very rarely is it. Even though my mind might interpret it as a conversation because that's how we as humans do. And it's easy for me to explain it to people that way because it makes sense to humans. But it's sensing and feeling and then just interpreting these into like, what is it in our human mind? How can I explain this to the person that it really understands, that they can understand that? And then from there, I tune in with the person's energy once we're on a call, because it's not just, I mean, I'm here as a gateway for the animals, but I also need to understand, what is the person's energy like? What are their capabilities? I mean, this animal might actually have to be like in some totally different lifestyle, but how can we bridge this gap to like, so that the human can understand this and their capability and their needs, give the animal what it needs, and then like the animal understand this is what's possible, and doing that. And so then I just give like a lot of what I feel like kind of intuitive downloads. And I have a large background in behavior and dog training and horse training and vet and diets and all of this stuff. So it's not hard for me to bring in real life like wisdom into this, that can be really beneficial almost immediately. And then if an animal needs ongoing work, like continuous, like say they have something that's more complex, and you could equate this to like complex trauma in humans. Okay. We'll call it that. It's very complex, or they've had outright like severe trauma, then I will hold sessions where it's just me and the animal, and we're just in an energetic realm, and we're doing energy clearing and frequency attunement, which is basically connecting the animal. And this applies to people too, the people that I work with, FYI, this isn't, and then they're tuning the animal to like the higher self. The higher self in this world is like the highest expression of who we are as a human being or an animal or whatever, you know. So that is like that ultimate space. And so it's just bringing this connection and bridging it is like, here's where your highest vision and highest expression. Animals are so responsive when you start working with their energy field with really high vibrational motions. So you can literally just stream white light energy into your animals and open like them up and visualize it coming all the way through their animals and just say, I want this to intentionally feel like unconditional love to my animal, and they will feel it so much quicker than what we ever will. And even just that act can shift so much energy in an animal. And so that's how it's like, and in those sessions, I'm constantly like sharing those insights and like relatable things that like the human can understand what's going on. And I mean, the animals just shift. They just do, you know, whether, and it works really well with medical stuff. I have a lot of senior animals. I mean, some have been kidney disease for like 3 years. They probably should have not been around this long, you know. I mean, when they come to me, they're pretty severe off, some of them. And, you know, I'm not saying it's like just me, because I'm also working with medicine too, right? Like I'm working with, I look at blood work, I look at everything. I look at it all. Like it's not just like, okay, here's just this like common thing, you know what I mean? So if somebody is like, I've got this and that, I'm like, do you have ultrasound? Do you have x-rays? Do you have blood? You know, I'm very, very thorough. I'm very, very detailed. And then we work with diet and all kinds of other things to create some more tangible results. So hopefully that's kind of a long, lengthy, it's hard to like simplify this, you know?
Exactly what we aim to do on this podcast. We bridge the gap between the clinical psychology, research, science based world and the more spiritual, ancient energetics, woo woo world. And it's no surprise why you are a guest on this podcast. And being the healer in the conversation between Heather and me, where I'm speaking to some of the more spiritual concepts and trying to explain what I do as a Reiki healer and an intuitive energy reader. Like, it's not easy to put that stuff into words because the spiritual journey isn't always easy to put into words and all parts that go into it. And so I'm always grateful for the guests that we bring in who are the intuitive healers, energy alchemists, etc., communicators between animal, spirit, etc., because you so beautifully just put all of that into like a nice little packaged, summary where I'm like, damn, she explained that perfectly and that helps me as well. And I love to hear that you have that background in the, again, more like science, research, medical based field, and then have taken the work that you've done there and infused it with your own intuitive energy reading and communication abilities. And like that, if there's anybody that bridges that gap between those two worlds as a guest, that's you right there. So thank you for explaining that exactly the way that you did, and also for just coming into this conversation like fully embodied in everything that you do and speaking to that as you have.
Yeah, it takes a lot of inner trust. As we were talking beforehand, it's not easy to do that. And honestly, when I started doing this, it was after reading Joe Dispenza 7 years ago, Becoming Supernatural. And I was like, well, hell, there's my science. And I literally hand that book out to like a Bible to anybody who's like, I need to make sense of this. You know, I'm like, here's your dude right here. Like, this is it. And because that kind of became like a permission slip for me to finally do it. It was because then I had that backing. I'm not saying everybody needs that. It's just at the time that's where I was at, and I needed that, almost like a permission slip to do that. Um I hope that other people go through and if they feel awakened in this line of work or whatever that they're doing and don't need to wait that long for a permission slip. I just have a lot of Saturn energy in me, so things move a little slower, and I've got to like really feel like I've well, the word you use, embodied what I'm doing, and that as I share it, it's going to really create some sort of energetic pivot or shift in somebody's life.
Devon also speaks about Dr. Joe Dispenza, and I know that like she speaks very highly of him in that work. But the other thing that you said is talking about like the inner trust and trusting yourself. And I think that like that's something I'm working with clients on all the time. I'm working on it personally. I think it's really challenging, and that's something that like I feel that I'm working on more after meeting Devon and working together in this podcast is like, I think we want to be this human, logical person, this being. And like, then we have these intuitive feelings or this like these callings. It's something that I feel like it's hard to speak to, but I can relate a lot to what you're saying when you're talking about like that trusting yourself and not waiting for all of that time.
Yeah, it is. I mean, the trust thing is a huge thing. And I feel that, especially for women, and I do actually work with some men in my practice, but it's really become apparent that even for women and like leadership with women, and not just if you're an entrepreneur or doing, but truly just as a woman being self-led, is that I feel one of the hardest things for women is really learning to trust, their own essence, their own emotion, their own being, and what they came here as because we're so different. And we've been told so often, like, we're too much, we're too this, we're too that. And if you are an intuitive, if you are an empath, if you are somebody with some sort of spiritual gift that's very different, you probably didn't really fit in very well, I mean, and even myself, like, if you looked at me, you would say, oh, she's great, she's well known, she's popular, she's this, but like, there's always this deep feeling of like, where do I belong? And I feel that, for me, that's just been like a lifelong journey that now I know it's because I'm here to help, not only our animals, but the people too that come through. It's like always this discovery process. And so part of me is always looking for the, sort of that like missing link, or how can we deepen this connection to ourselves? And then the other part of me is like also just accepting that we are, so it's always this like, how can we do this without intellectualizing it, without being so overly like, what's the word? Overly, invested in just trying to analyze ourselves and figure it all out, and just allowing ourselves to be. And and I found astrology, and now I've been embarking on a human design certification as well. And I that's with astrology, it's like one of the things I didn't really offer it because I did it so differently. I don't work very rarely with sun like rising. I work with like, I have Pluto conjunct my ascendant. I work with the shadow. I work with like the really deep stuff, the karmic stuff we came here to clear. And I don't look at karma as debts we have to pay off. It's just like the lessons we're here to learn and work through and move through. And I use it as a tool to help deepen my energy clearing awareness. It's like, okay, here's something this person is really learning right now in this cycle. They're really moving through it hard. And then through that evolution, we can use that as like great empowerment. We can Pluto and an ascendant, like for example, with me, like it's like we were talking before here, it can either magnetize or repel, but it is also the mark. It's in my first house. It's right on my rising, conjunct my north node. It is my point of destiny. I am here to lead the way, like through in the first house, by being seen, by being visible. That's really hard to get out of your own way, especially if you've had a lot of difficult, challenging experiences in your life. So but then when you learn like how to elevate that experience where you're not caught up, well, a lot of people they'll say, well, Pluto's on my ascendant, so that's why I'm the way that I'm at. I'm like, no. Pluto's on your ascendant, and you get to be really, really amazing at leadership, and you're here to transform the way that leadership is seen in the world, So it's kind of like always taking this like, even if you're working in like therapy, like you do, Heather, and I'm sure you relate to this, it's like taking that deep inner work and like, what is the elevated experience of this? How can we transform this into a great strength and a great source of power for yourself?
It's reminding me a lot what you're saying of even just like trauma work and being able to like reframe into like resilience and how, yes, we have these things that we have to work through and these scars, as people call them. And yet, like, it's still our responsibility to work through it. And we owe it to ourselves to work through it. And it does make us stronger. We may not have wanted, of course, these things in the first place, but it's impossible for us to not come out the other side a different, stronger, grown person.
Yeah. And when you don't, you feel like there's something missing.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, and most people know, you know, most people know the part of themselves that they're denying. They just don't want to own it because of whatever they've been told, whatever they've had to experience. Or, for me, I went through a lot of rejection through my family roots and through a lot of judgment. It was very um, subtle. My mother was borderline. So like those rejections are very manipulative, and they get in your head, and they constantly make you doubt your reality. And they're not like a full blown, like I'm going to, it's not physical abuse. Like I wasn't, my basic needs were taken care of. My parents were pretty good middle class. My dad was a high functioning alcoholic and a business owner. So you can see, but it's so like complex that it doesn't, until you really dive into those, you know, and you really realize like, oh, okay, that's where this fear is. That's why I'm judging myself. That's why I don't feel comfortable in my body. This is why I disassociate and why I can't be present with difficult emotions, because I had to grow up really early and disconnect from that. So it's like, and it's not to identify it, because I don't completely, like, I don't overly identify with it, but it allows me to give myself a whole lot of compassion for that child that didn't have what he or she needed. And so, and this is very similar, Heather, I feel like, and overlapping with the spiritual aspect. And then I just take it to the another realm, similar to Devon, where it's like, okay, we're going to move through that. We're going to identify with it. And then where do you really want to go? What are your deepest desires in this lifetime? And let's not be afraid to acknowledge them, and let's own them. Let's claim them, and let's like start clearing the energy. So like that path forward starts to really be illuminated, and we can integrate all those beautiful, like, little gems that want to come down through you, and start really creating change in your life that activates you, that liberates you from all of that, right?
This has been such an inspiring conversation, right? Because we started out with your expertise in animal communication and end of life transitioning and whatnot. And we've gotten to a point now where, and I think this is also kind of the trajectory of your business, where it's like that's where you started out. And now you're taking it to an even deeper level, where you're helping your clients meet themselves on that deepest level, like very much in the shadow parts of us that typically we like to push to the side, shove down, avoid. And you're like, no, let's now make friends with that part of ourselves and alchemize that into our greatest superpower and, towards our purpose. And just getting to see or getting to know the side of you and the way that your own personal healing growth journey has evolved over time, and how you now are helping your clients do the same. Really powerful. I know that we could spend an entire another hour having this conversation, so we will just have to have you on the podcast another month, happily. For the sake of time, I have
Yes.
two questions for you.
Mhm.
As we were beginning to wrap up, could you leave us with one tip, tool, note for our listeners who want to communicate or connect with their animals on a deeper level? And then two, in the way that you are taking your business now on helping people meet themselves on that deeper level, if you have one last tip, tool, thought that you would like to add there.
Gosh, there's so many, but I feel like being able to take a step back and really detach from that relationship a little bit and see life through their eyes and realize they are not humans. They are animals with very different instincts, a lens, the way that they view life. And even if you are able to do that, I promise you, you will see a difference in them, and just learn what it is like to be in their world and in their body through their lens, through their like awareness, right? That in itself, I feel like can just be so really, really profound for trying to understand behavior, health, what their experience is in that way. And then the other part was around in the business where people meeting themselves through the spiritual path. So I feel like when it comes to meeting yourself, the number one thing that and probably the biggest mistake I didn't make that I made was truly never lending myself compassion, and I feel like that that was a big blind spot for me. I mean, so much that even as I say it, I get a little emotional because I like, and this is where astrology can be so helpful and understanding. And I'm a 3/6 in human design. So, like, I am supposed to kind of quote unquote fail at a lot of things and try things and cultivate resilience. But instead of looking at it as failure, it was like, I'm supposed to experience a lot of things so that I can share with people what works and what doesn't work. And that Cap Moon, you just come in with deep mother wounds, deep father wounds, and like you grow up really early. Like anybody with a Capricorn moon has that. So I was really hard on myself because I always felt like there was something inherently wrong with me. And when I shifted that around, like there's nothing wrong with me. This is just a part of my journey and a part of my experience. And this is a daily reminder. This isn't something that I'm just like one and done. I have to constantly, I have like compassion on my mirror. I literally have it written there because that is where my mind can go very easily based on my own conditioning in this lifetime. And that compassion piece is just huge. And I feel like so many people miss it. It's simple, but it's often the thing that I feel like most people miss.
Thank you for sharing so honestly about your experience and how it's gotten you to the point that you're at, but also like you having to continue to remind yourself that. And I tell my clients all the time to write things on your mirror or stick little notes to yourself because we are conditioned in one way. And I think we have to constantly be working to unlearn and then recondition ourselves. So I think that like that just speaks to me so much. And I think it's so powerful. And I just appreciate you sharing that with us.
Yeah, you're welcome. Well, we're in a good era. We're in a time where we have so much insight and information, and I only wish that my parents had access to everything that we do. It's a beautiful time to like be alive and have all this, like, if you're willing to be like, yay. I
It
get to
really
hear.
is. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Ray, for joining us today. Before we leave, how can our listeners find you? How can they connect with you?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram pretty regularly. I do have a Facebook page. It's Facebook. But I'm also, my website is radiantvibes.com. And that's where you can find the journey that I spoke about, the end of life course. But I'll give you guys a little promo code to give for your audience. And then I have an animal communication course on connecting with your own personal animals. It's not about being an animal communicator. It's about healing with your own animals and deepening that experience. And of course, you can connect with all my other offerings on there and see what else is there. But yeah.
Awesome. Thank you again so much. All of the links to your social accounts, to any offerings, any promo codes will be listed in our show notes. And as always, there will be a spot for those listeners on Spotify or on YouTube, of course, to drop any questions that you have for Ray, for Heather, and me. We will absolutely be having you again on the podcast somewhere down the road, Ray. So thank you again for joining us, Heather. Always love sharing this space with you as well, and look forward to future conversations.
Yeah. Thank you, Ray. Thank you, Devon. And we'll talk to everybody next week.
Bye.
Bye. We are so glad that you took the time to share this space with us. We'll be releasing new episodes of Mind Meets Body and Soul every Tuesday, so be sure to give us a follow and share this podcast with those you love.
To connect with us and join our communities, head to the show notes where you'll find our contact information and individual websites. Until next week, stay grounded, keep growing, and trust that everything you seek is unfolding for you.